This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Uplight. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on the demand stack, my guest is Jonathan Hart, Policy Director with the California Solar and Storage Association, or CALSA. John's going to give us his thoughts on the demand stack concept proposed by energy management and demand flexibility provider Uplight. It's an approach to customer-owned distributed energy resources, or DER, that can maximize their benefits to utilities, customers, and the power system. John began his almost 15-year energy career as a research associate with Vermont's very distinguished Institute for Energy and the Environment. He then worked on DER strategy at the Center for Sustainable Energy, was a virtual power plant manager with EDF Renewables North America, and worked in policy at PowerFlex. He became CALSA's policy director in July of last year. So, John, to begin with, before we get into this demand stack concept, tell me just basically where you are on the value of DERs and VPPs to the power system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. There are a lot of untapped, there's a lot of untapped value with DERs and virtual power plants. There's several bills in California right now being run. CALSA has been working with different offices. Assemblymember Schultz, Assembly Bill 1975, Senator Becker, Senate Bill 913. Which they do different things. One is increasing grid utilization, what's called by using distributed energy resources, non-wires alternatives to shift load and take stress off the distribution grid at key times.
We're going to talk about system utilization in just a few minutes, but carry on.
Yeah. So that would use DERs to avoid distribution build out and increase the use of our existing distribution grid. The other 913 would what I consider level the playing field for distributed energy resources to participate in California's energy markets at the CAISO and provide resource adequacy. And so those are just two examples. There are many others. There are programs right now in California that are emergency type programs. The demand side grid support, or DSGS program, has been very successful, the most successful VPP program in California by a long shot, and potentially even in the country. That program, however, is at risk of being defunded. So we see that there's a lot of untapped opportunities that either are, our regulators are letting fall through the cracks or just haven't been leveraged yet. And that's a lot of my work, is trying to open up those new value streams and really find opportunities to provide value that DERs can provide.
I'm going to move on to the next question, but I want to pick up on a couple of things you said. First of all, that there's a proposal, I think, that has been made by is it the California Energy System or the California Energy Commission or the California Public Utilities Commission to revise the DSGS program? And we did a podcast on that with the head of Vote Solar. So if listeners are interested in that, look up the podcast on with Sachu Constantine of Vote Solar, and maybe we'll have John come back and tell us what he thinks about the changes that are proposed and on the table for the DSGS system. And one other thing, real quick, I'm glad you brought up the bill by Representative Assemblyman Becker. Is it Assemblyman or Senator Becker?
Senator Becker.
Senator Becker. Yeah, I remember when he was an assemblyman. But anyway, he is just unbelievably heroic in pushing the value of distributed resources and clean energy in California. And I just wanted to add to your mention of him by giving him a shout out. But let's get to the demand stack. That's what we're here for. Uplight has proposed this concept. They call it the demand stack because it would mirror the utilities' supply stack that they use in planning and operations. Do you think that could motivate utilities to see these programs, behavioral, rates-based, and device-driven demand-side programs, things like energy efficiency, demand response, time-varying rates. Do you think if that could help utilities if see the demand-side resources as a valuable set of resources? What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I think it could help utilities in California. Utilities see what they are required to see typically. They see dollars, which means building out the grid, and they have many ways of getting dollars. Anything that doesn't do that directly for them, they have an inherent disinterest in it, and DERs might seem like an annoyance to them if it's potentially taking away from business. I guess at best an annoyance, or it's a competitor in some ways, and bringing downward pressure on the need to build out the grid. So whether I don't know that they would change their minds necessarily because there's a value stack. However, if they are required to recognize and compensate for the value, I think they would do that if it was a requirement. I think there's definitely validity there to say, that we should prioritize in a demand stack certain types of approaches before, for example, just going straight to building out the grid, or before procuring for additional generation out of state or whatever it is. Uh, I think that having a requirement to first tap local resources could be a huge benefit, and it would save ratepayers lots of money to do so. Going back to the question whether utilities see the value of that, if they're required to do so, then they will pay for it. But I don't know exactly how they would view it.
As I know, CALSA has a great tradition of being very hawkish on attacking the problem that we've talked about many times here on the podcast. The what I call the perverse incentive. The utilities make more money when they build things than when they take advantage of things that are already built and maybe that they don't even own. But I agree with you that if you could require them to look at the demand stack, that set of distributed resources in their planning, then they might see that there's value in operations. And that really brings me to my next question, John. The idea of system utilization is starting to emerge as a key to understanding how to protect affordability without compromising reliability. And there was a bill in Virginia big bill in Virginia that passed. You mentioned that there's one on the table here in California. So, and the interesting thing about system utilization is that utilities would be getting potentially earnings from using the demand side resources to shift them to other times to get more system utilization, to get more kilowatt hours sold by their systems without building anything. So there's a couple of questions embedded in there. Do you think the idea of system utilization can help in these ways? Do you think that if you see demand side resources as a stack, number one, could it improve system utilization? And number two, could it deliver on those affordability and reliability results by giving us utilities some other kind of motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of that question, I think that having a demand stack, or having the way I would see it is a checklist that you go through. So utility is starting seeing into the future of this part of the grid. We're going to need these types of upgrades if things continue the way they are, or if this large load plans to interconnect, or whatever it is. And as you mentioned, the perverse incentive of, well, they make more money the more infrastructure they build out. So that's just the go-to, and that's what they do, and they're good at, is building the grid. And I that's not necessarily a bad thing. We absolutely need the grid. However, if you take that to an extreme, then you get into a situation where we are in California, where rates are skyrocketing, and there's still a lot of work to be done. It's going to have a huge impact on the economy, and rates go up and all that. And so having this requirement to basically have a checklist of, before just going straight to we need to build out whatever it is, upgrade parts of the grid, this checklist of, could the, energy efficiency, batteries, front of the meter, behind the meter, uh, EV charging programs, whatever it is, you have this list that you go through. Could this be a more cost-effective way to manage the grid and defer or potentially even avoid these build-outs? Absolutely could have massive impacts. And depending on how you design that, could be beneficial for the utility as well in their interest. I think what is beneficial for the utility all comes down to how you design, what they're getting a rate of return on and how they're able to make their money. And so I think they could be designed in a way that benefits everyone. I'm glad you mentioned the Virginia bill. California, the Schultz bill, Assemblymember Schultz bill that I mentioned, AB 1975, takes a lot of those concepts and even language from that bill, builds on that a bit, and require utilities to start reporting data on grid utilization, and then the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, to then work with utilities on developing metrics that they need to meet for parts of the grid, and developing programs to meet that. Also, Becker, we mentioned Senator Becker has another bill, SB 905. It's a pretty big bill, a lot of things in there. One component of that is a similar grid utilization, utilities reporting on grid utilization. So it's a concept that's starting and it's growing. I think that will gain a lot of traction over the country, because this is not a California specific issue, but would be really relevant to any utility. I think the basic or the bottom line is, we have the technologies, we have the customers who have adopted the technologies to provide solutions. Now we need the right regulatory structures to allow that to happen.
The grid is changing fast, with data centers, electrification, and extreme weather driving a surge in energy demand. Utilities can meet the moment with existing resources by activating energy customers and their connected devices with Uplight's integrated demand stack. Uplight coordinates energy efficiency, rates, demand response, and virtual power plant programs into one cohesive strategy to improve grid resiliency and energy affordability. Their AI-powered platform connects customers to best fit programs, then forecasts, dispatches, and measures flexible capacity to deliver megawatts when the grid needs it most. Learn how Uplight is helping leading utilities harness over 8 gigawatts of flexible load at uplight.com/USEA.
It's interesting because the Virginia bill, and at least part of the California bills, it's merely a request of the utilities to provide the amount of system utilization that they are getting. It's not necessarily prescriptive, oh, you got to build more coal, or you got to build more solar, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. It's just, tell us how much of your system you're using. Because what we're finding, and what we know is true, is that about, 90% or more of the time, utilities are using maybe 50 or 60% of their systems. The rest, it's empty. And we have this demand stack that can be used to shift some of the usage at that other peaking 10% of the time away from there to when the system isn't being used as much. Am I saying that right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And it will depend across, parts of the grid and which utility, but absolutely right in that recent data I've seen is, depending on parts of the grid, it might only be around 35-45% usage of the grid. So it's, half or less than half of what the grid can actually handle on certain parts, meaning that if there's only a few hours of the year where you're really maxing out those parts of the grid, there's a huge potential to you shift that and really defer building out or upgrading those parts of the grid for a long time. Um,
And
and
I just want, I don't mean to
Mhm.
interrupt you, John, but and if you have this checklist that you referred to, I love that idea of a demand stack. What's in the demand stack? And if you have that in planning, then you know right from the get-go, before you ever get to operations, here's things that we can do to shift our usage to those times when it's not being used, right?
Yeah. So I think things that would be in there, and this is not in necessarily the order that you would have to go through, and it would likely depend on what the type of upgrade is. Uh, but things that you could use. So first, in California, there are a few projects out there, pilot projects that were part of the distribution DIDF, and I should know this off the top of my head, Distribution Infrastructure Deferral Framework. It was a pilot program that largely was unsuccessful due to a number of reasons, mostly the program design. Uh, However, there were a few projects out of that are actually up and running right now, and they are front of the meter but distribution tied storage projects that were used to offset the need to upgrade transformers, I believe. And the battery operator gets day ahead signal from the utility. So in this example, Pacific Gas and Electric tells them, okay, tomorrow we need you to charge during these hours, discharge during these hours. They do that, they spread out the load, and several years into this, the utility has not needed to make any upgrades to that transformers. So ratepayers are saving money on that. Uh, so as an example, front of the meter storage, you could do the same thing or similar things behind the meter storage. And then there's a whole plethora of technologies behind the meter. EV charging, whether it's bidirectional or not, whether you're just changing when you're charging or how much you're charging, thermostats, heat pumps. There are many others, but those are all options that can be tapped into.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and there's a program that just got approved by the Minnesota Commission that is going to really show how that can work, how those front of the meter batteries, which are on the distribution system, so they're demand side in a significant way, can serve to really defer utility infrastructure investments. But I want to get to one last question, John. This is the last one. We don't have a whole lot of time left, so let's try to handle this. And in fact, we've really talked about this subject. The other term that I wanted to ask you about that has become really important uh, because load is growing and load is also becoming somewhat uncertain. We don't know how much electrification, we don't know how much data center demand is going to be there. And the term is flexibility. And that's what we've really been talking about with these demand side resources. But I want to specifically ask you, do you think that this stack concept could help maximize flexibility and what benefits do you think that could provide the power system? Just in a couple of minutes, John. We don't have a whole
Yep.
lot of time.
Yeah. So yes, I definitely think there would be flexibility on what options you can use. And I think best, one of the benefits you get out of this is the flexibility. Uh, you don't want to make big upgrades to the grid based on, one or a handful of large loads, large customers that are going to be coming online, and then have those customers, that load not materialize. Those customers cancel the data center or whatever. So if you instead are able to rely on distributed resources to help offset the need to build out the grid, that can help you in those kinds of situations where you don't need to make massive capital investments beforehand. Also, not just large load customers, but millions of small load customers that are adding new load as they electrify. You can do that at the source. Someone's putting in, updating their home, getting rid of all their gas, putting in all electric appliances. there can be opportunities there. There's many of those new appliances, for example, the heat pump water heater or air conditioner heat pump can be used as flexibility resources, or the customer's getting an EV and putting in a charger that can be used or a battery or solar and storage. Anyway, all these resources as they're being put in, if these types of programs are in place at the onset, you can start to manage that load on parts of the grid where it's needed as that load materializes, and you kind of avoid getting into this massive load growth. Now, what are we going to do with it? But are able to handle it at the source.
Yeah, the more I think about it and the more I talk to people about it, I realize that the demand stack is really a fairly simple concept. Like you say, it's a checklist, and it incorporates flexibility and system utilization almost as one concept. And it's really could potentially be so useful to utilities in their planning and then taking that planning into operations. But John, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you. My guest has been CalSA Policy Director Jonathan Hart. He's provided a perspective on this new concept of the utility demand stack, an innovative way to maximize the benefits of utility demand side management programs. I also want to thank our sponsor, Uplight, and my producer, Melissa Brown. And as always, I've got to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and follow. And follow our quest for energy transition solutions.